A very good evening, everyone. Kindly allow me to take this august opportunity to welcome Honorable Mr. Justice Sanjeev Sachdeva, our esteemed panel of speakers, seniors, and dear colleagues. Cybercrime carries a potent threat to a person or nation security and financial health. A report published in 2014 established that the annual damage to the global economy was $445 billion. Further, a study conducted by Center for Strategies and International Studies concluded that close to $600 billion, nearly 1% of global GDP, is lost to cybercrime each year. I am positive that at the end of this evening, we will not only be more enlightened about all the parameters encompassing cybercrime, but we shall also move forward, sharing the vision of our esteemed guests and speakers. Once again, I am delighted to have you all with us this evening. Thank you. Now I request Honorable Justice Sanjeev Sachdeva to enlighten the ceremonial lamp along with other dignitaries so that we can start the session.
Thank you very much for joining us today. This will be a rich experience. May I request Justice Sachdeva, Mr. Mata, Mrs. Luthra, Anu Mehta, Mr. Aman Sareem, to please join us. As most of us know, this particular branch has brought in a serious change in our life. Internet has changed the life. When I joined profession in the year 1991, there was no internet. Most of the youngsters will never believe it today. Everything they do is on the net. You want to order food, you want to do your banking transactions, you want to post your personal, professional achievements, everything is on the net. We have to make sure that everything is controlled. I remember in the year 1998, when internet brought the revolution, serious changes started happening. And first case I did was on internet. I did was the DPS MMS case, the liability of intermediary, how IPC versus internet laws, so on and so forth. With Shreya Shingal's judgment, lot has changed also. So I would request Justice Sachdeva to come and enlighten us on the latest legal developments and his thoughts on the subject. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Sondhi. Now, there is one correction I will make to the speech which was made earlier, that there will be some clarity. If after my session all of you are not confused, I think I would have failed in doing my job. And that's what we all face every day, at least sitting on the other side. You'd all make an effort to try and confuse us completely, so I'm going to take it out on you. Now, it's always a pleasure to address an audience which is a young audience. Cybercrime. Cyber is a subject. Can I request the standing councils to please sit, if you can find a place? Because there are some things and please focus yourself on a position where you can see the TV screen, because I'm not going to give a long lecture of things, and I'm not going to talk on law. Because law, I'm sure you can all read in the law books. My topic is going to be primarily, well, the ones who are sitting there, I doubt if you'll be able to see the screen. If you don't see the screen, you'll not be, because I'm not speaking. I'm going to show you things on the screen. So find a place where you can see the screen. 20th July 1969, this famous phrase was spoken, "Eagle has landed." How many of you have heard the expression "eagle has landed"? Well, it's not the Jack Higgins book bestseller or "Eagle has landed" or even the World War II movie. These were the words first spoken by man on the moon. That was Neil Armstrong on 20th July 1969, when Apollo 11 landed on the moon. This is a photograph. There are some disputes about this, but that's how it is. Eagle landed on the moon. Now, how many of you use a smartphone? Or rather, let me put it like this. How many of you don't use a smartphone? Well, the highly technical or intellectual ones don't use a smartphone because they know that they can be a victim of a cybercrime if they use a smartphone. Now, why I'm bringing up a concept of a smartphone is that Apollo 11, which landed on the moon, had a computer which was 1300 times slower than an iPhone 5. Today we are talking of iPhone 11. In fact, today morning there was a release article of what iPhone 11 is going to look like. Apollo, now how many of you know what a RAM is? We all go and buy a phone, we want how many gigabytes? 16 GB, 32 GB RAM, 8 GB RAM. Do you know what a RAM is? Or what GB actually stands for? Computer does not understand characters or alphabets, it understands zeros and ones. Zeros and 1 means light is off is 0 and light is on is 1. So in 8 combination of 8, it understands the symbols. 0 is a bit, 0 or 1 is a bit, 8 combination of 8 is a byte. 1028 bytes is a kilobyte, and 1028 kilobytes is a megabyte, and 1028 megabytes is a gigabyte. Today we have smartphones which talk of 16 GB. I'm sure everybody would here have a phone which has 4 GB or 8 GB RAM. And then we talk of hard disk storage of 128 GB, and now we are on 1 terabyte. Do you know what capacity was there on the Apollo 11 computer which guided Apollo 11 to the moon? The RAM of that computer, it was 4 kilobytes. And today we talk of 1 gigabyte iPhone 5. Processing memory is 1 gigabyte, iPhone 5 is 1.3 gigabyte. Now this is Samsung 9. S9 has 4 into 2.7 gigahertz of computing capacity. That's the kind of capacity you have. So virtually sitting over here, each one of you can guide over 100,000 Apollo 11s to the moon and back. That's the kind of computing power we have in our hand. How many of you have ever done a Google search, gone on Google and searched for something? You know, one search takes more computing power than that was spent on all Apollo programs. That's the kind of computing power only one Google search does. That's the kind of technology we hold on our hand, and that's the kind of level we have reached today. Now this is all, Mr. Sondhi had talked about when internet was started. Well, he's off by a few years as to when internet actually started. How many of you have seen a device like this? I in fact have one, still have one at home, which is this is how cell phones were started. In 1995, first time a cell phone came in this country. How many of you did you buy a cell phone at that point of time? Well, very few. And do you know what was the call cost? it was 32 rupees incoming and 32 rupees outgoing. And for initially month and a half it was free. So they wanted you to get used to the cell phones. So, and the smart ones used to, well, receive a missed call and switch it off. And then go to the closest PCO and call back. And all of us, and God forbid, and let me tell you, it used to be computed in minutes, not in seconds. Now you have pulses of seconds. And the moment 61 seconds would pass, it will be another 2 rupees. So we all used to start a stopwatch. The moment call will come in, you'll start a stopwatch. 59 seconds and you'll switch it off. Because you can't afford another 32 minutes of incoming call. And then smartphones then traveled, and the last one is Apple III. Now that's how computing has gone, and this is when computers came in 1984. Computers started. In 1985 we had a 8086 computer which had 2 floppy drives, and the floppy drive used to be 1.2 kilobytes or something, and you had to insert 2 floppy drives for a computer to run. Today we are talking of, we carry in a pen drive 1 terabyte of data, and that's how computers started. Now, let me take you into a world of imagination. This entire cyberspace, the concept cyber, is imaginary. Has anybody seen cyber? We've all worked on imagination. This is a world with no boundaries, world with no limits. This is world of limitless potential. This is actually the virtual world. Today we live in a digital world. It's a new world which is like discovery of a parallel planet. There is, in this new world, there are no laws, no legal orders, no countries, no territories, no boundaries, no identities, no names, no addresses. Everyone is free to visit this parallel planet. All you need to do is pick up your device and you are onto this parallel planet. We have found the new parallel world, the virtual world. You don't have identities, you create your own identity. How many of you created an identity? Has any one of you created an identity in cyberspace? Nobody? How many of you have a Facebook account? How many of you use WhatsApp? You have something called a DP. I don't know what DP means. You have a profile pic. Now that's your identity. Now I can put XYZ's DP on my WhatsApp and profile pic, or is it vice versa? I don't know. On your Facebook. And you have an identity. You have a name attached, you create a new name. There are no properties. Your account is a property. Now, cyber lawyers will tell you that your identity is a property. And today when we've gone into the concept of Aadhaar, it's actually a major revelation which is happening. Space is in abundance. You can have as many properties you want to create, as many spaces, as many accounts you want to create. You can create, you may have as many Gmail accounts, Ymail accounts. There's no limit. Nobody is going to regulate it. There are no governments. There are no rules of the game. There are no referee. The government never reached there first. It is the corporate houses and huge corporations that reach there first. They develop the space, so they control it. Today, can any government come and say that, yes, we control cyberspace? They don't. So there are no rules of game. The only rule of game is profit. If it's Gmail, Ymail, Microsoft, they're all working for one concept, profit for themselves. Now let me take you into entry into the virtual world. 31st July 1995, West Bengal Chief Minister made the first cellular phone call. I remember in 92 when I was visiting England, the solicitor there had a cell phone which was a huge machine. He had to have a briefcase in which he had to carry a cell phone. Today we have these compact cell phones. Now we went into a stage where cell phones shrunk. Now again they're becoming big. Now we've got those foldable phones coming up. 14th August 1995, Videsh Sanchar Nigam launched first full internet service for public use. And I still remember there was this magazine called PC Quest. It still comes though. PC Quest had created a database where you could go onto the database and download some software, some games, some pictures. That's how computers started. Then we've come into the world of social media. Most of you will identify these icons. I somehow don't know some of them. Facebook started as Face Mash on 28th October 2003. It was actually started for interaction between college students to share information. but then somehow it picked up and we all know where it has reached today. 1 billion people, 240 million photos, 1 trillion connections, Facebook popularity is ever increasing. These are some figures of how Facebook has grown in the market. Twitter, social media, top social media sites. Today, Facebook is a #1, Google Plus. Some interesting facts I'd like to share with you. Most of the people use social media today, every day's life. Even right now, some of us are using social media, chatting, uploading data, uploading photographs, pictures. You click a photograph, upload it. You click a motion picture and upload it. Millions of active users are there. Every minute, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of content is being uploaded. So that's the kind of space we are dealing with. Now there are some legal issues which arise. Identity theft. Knowingly, unknowingly, we post huge amount of personal data on social network sites. Vast amount of personal information represent a risk to our safety and privacy. This data can be used by unauthorized third party to misappropriate our identity. You see, what is your identity in cyberspace? It's your password, user ID. What if someone were to steal it and use it? We hear about cyber crimes happening. People stealing information, data, money from accounts. How does that happen? You share your user ID password, your identity is gone. And incidentally, we all go by this Aadhaar and we have this. How many of you got your Aadhaar linked to your phone? I think everybody did. Now there was a case which had come up, which has now been referred as a PIL. A person, some crime was being committed by calling up people, that insurance scams, etc. So they intercepted 4 telephone numbers, cell phone numbers, and they found out that these cell phones were being used for that wishing and phishing scams. So the investigating officer, when he investigated, he realized that these 4 had been linked to Aadhaar. So he traced out those 4 individuals whose Aadhaar had been used were caught. Now they said that they had never taken those connections. But then the investigating officer probed further and he found that all these connections had been issued from one service provider, one shop. He went to the shop and realized that the shopkeeper who was sitting there, or the person who was sitting there, was actually committing a fraud. How was he committing a fraud? When you go for your Aadhaar linkage, what happens? He tells you, put your thumb. You put your thumb, he says, ho gaya. And promptly you get an SMS that your Aadhaar has been verified and it is linked. Now, has any one of you ever faced a situation where he says, nahi ji, theek nahi aaya, he cleans it with a cloth and asks you to put your thumb again? Very often we face that problem. Now, what that person was doing was actually when that the customer had put his thumb, it was verified. But he told him it's not actually verified, please put your thumb again. So he put his thumb again. In the second time he issued a SIM card in his name. He got 2 SMSs that Aadhaar is linked. You'll ignore it because you actually put your thumb impression twice, so you'll accept it's actually happened. So that is how he was using that person's identity and issuing a SIM card. So that's identity theft. How many of you went to, during the demonetization time, went to the bank to withdraw money? Or know what was the process of withdrawing money? You'll go into a bank, give your ID proof and withdraw money. Now, has anybody or any agency verified if that ID proof has been used more than once by one bank? Supposing in a locality, for example, like Connaught Place, there are about 4,000 banks. All these managers are in league with each other, so they tell them, all right, we've received 50 crores to be distributed. Let's distribute only 5 crores. Rest 45 crores will distribute amongst ourselves. But on paper, they will show that we've actually issued after verification of the identity of the person. So you have legally issued 5 crores and received 5 crore identity papers for those 5 crores. Make a photocopy, give it to the neighboring branch. And he gives you his neighboring branch, his documents. So you have 10 crores withdrawn and likewise circulated amongst yourself. That's how identity theft takes place. Your identity used for something else. I incidentally got a call from friend of mine living outside Delhi, that he'd got a call from some police officer saying a vehicle in his name, or I think a Santro or something, has been seized with drugs in it. And he said, I had never bought it. So what happened was, when he'd gone into, for one of these transactions, when you're going to buy a vehicle, what is required? A photocopy of your ID proof? How many of you have used your ID proof for some purpose or the other? All of us do it. What if a photocopy from there is used for registering a vehicle in your name, and then that vehicle is used in a crime? Supposing bomb is found or some explosives are found in a vehicle which is registered in your name, what is going to be your fate? Or a cell phone which, or SIM card which is used or issued in your name is used for triggering an explosive device. What is going to be your fate? How many years do you think you'll languish in jail? And ultimately probably be convicted also. So be very careful when you share your documents. Specifically, one word of caution is, when you're sharing your document, please mention on it the purpose, date when you are submitting it. We all say true copy, signed and hand it over. That's all. So be very careful. Facebook, 5 to 6% of accounts on Facebook are fake.
Identity theft doesn't just happen in the movies. It affects millions of people each year and can just as easily happen to you. In the blink of an eye, your personal information can become, well, not so personal. Identity thieves steal your credit and good name to commit crimes that can ruin the rest of your life. With your identity, they can easily open new bank accounts, obtain credit cards and loans for major purchases, or binge shopping. They can even use your identity to get passports and government support. Keep your personal information from falling into the wrong hands. Carry the least possible ID with you, and never give out personal information unless you know who you're giving it to and why. Identity theft is on the rise and can easily happen to anyone. So take charge. Don't let it ruin your life.
You see, just as third-party material posted to social media site may infringe copyright or trademark or disclose confidential information, posting photographs and video without proper permission may violate privacy rights of individuals. And individual details like name, address, interest, family, etc. are often available on various sites. Passing on such information to interested parties can lead to invasion of privacy. You all use Facebook, I assume. When you go on Facebook, on the right side you will see those advertisements. Now, how many of you have noticed those advertisements? Do you see that there is a pattern in those advertisements? Yes. Next time, what is the pattern? It tracks you. They use artificial intelligence. Now, one example would be, you go onto Facebook, see the advertisement, shut it down, go onto Google, search for something. For example, search for, say, a computer, a headphone, or even a city like Indore or Bhopal. Just search it, switch it off, come back to Facebook. Promptly you will start getting advertisements of the article you've searched. So what is happening? Somebody is monitoring it and sharing that information. So all these corporate houses share information. So you get hits. Two people sit on two computers side by side and make it and do a same search. The result will be different because the computer tracks. Google will always keep a track of what your preference is. Men will get different result. Female will get different result. A young boy will get a different result, and an old person will get a different result because you're always being tracked. But then there are data breaches, hacking happening. Now, this was a website of a very important agency which got hacked at one point of time. Number of government websites which have been hacked. How many of you are aware of spy files? We all use internet banking and all. You see, this is, for example, an email which had come to somebody from HDFC Bank that your account is locked. So please log in again. Incidentally, I had an email sent to me from one of my email providers that your account is going to be deactivated after 3 days. We are all shutting down. Please click here to shift your account to somewhere else, and etc. So all they were doing was waiting for you to go to that particular link, key in your user ID and password, and seal your information. That's what these phishing sites do. For example, PayPal. PayPal says your account has been limited until we hear from you. Update now. Now, if you get a message like this, what is it you'll do? Promptly log on. Update. For example, if you get a message from Facebook, we are going to shut down Facebook, please update your account. You will promptly go and update it. Don't. Nobody sends you these messages. Don't do it till actually it locks. Apple support, similar thing, again Bank of Scotland, Amazon. Just look at this spoofed website URL. What happens is you get an extra character or I instead of L or L instead of I. Here in Amazon there is an extra N, which you won't notice. And you'll probably log on. And there promptly your information goes. Similarly, a phishing link.
How likely are you to experience a cyber attack against your personal data? Now, more than ever, people are vulnerable to cyber threats like phishing scams, password hacking, and different types of computer malware that can place your sacred information at stake. One of the newest culprits of this online assault is called ransomware. Once installed on a person's computer or smartphone device, ransomware launches an all-out extortion attack against the individual or companies being hacked, preventing you from gaining access to your PC or files, literally holding your device hostage until you pay up. In February 2016, hackers targeted Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center by using ransomware to encrypt their computer files, including many patient records. The attack brought all the hospital functions to a complete halt. In the end, the hospital was forced to pay more than $17,000 worth of Bitcoin to regain control of their systems. More recently, criminal hackers successfully released a new strain of ransomware known as WannaCry. In May 2017, hackers used the malware to launch a worldwide cyber attack against municipalities in more than 150 countries, impacting hospitals, universities, manufacturers, and government agencies, freezing hundreds of thousands of computers, demanding that users pay up to regain control of their systems. Still, despite these most recent attacks, many people fail to safeguard their online information and protect their devices from hackers. Because of this, the threat level that everyday Americans face is very high.
So please ensure that your data is backed up, your systems are protected. Otherwise, what happens suddenly you switch on your system and it says, sorry, access denied. What do you do? All your information of years of data is going to get lost. Criminal activity, now again, issue of evidence relating to criminal activity. Social network sites are increasingly becoming a source for discovery and investigation of criminal activity by members. Profiles are useful in determining the identity of and locating the perpetrator of a crime. These agencies use your social media network sites to access information, to access evidence. Now, Bangladesh arrests key suspect in US blogger's murder case. They found him because he was in contact with the deceased over his Facebook account. So they could then trace him. Posting of text and photos on social network sites have been source of discovery of criminal activity and ultimately evidence of crimes. Social networking activities have also served as a catalyst for offline criminal activities and charges. Mumbai ATS reported that some persons behind 2611 attacks kept in touch throughout over Facebook. And our media was actually portraying what was actually happening live, and they were watching real videos. There is huge amount of data available in social media websites. Government agencies mine these social media network sites for evidence. Now we can quickly jump to this. Now coming to electronic evidence. Now unique nature of electronic evidence is that as well as the ease with which it can be manipulated or falsified, would such evidence be admissible or reliable? How do you collect and produce this evidence? How do you source this evidence? How will you authenticate evidence? Electronic evidence can be found in digital files, emails, digital photographs, word processing documents, you name it and you have it. Anything which is connected on the cyberspace will have some trace or the other, will have a digital footprint. What is a digital footprint? It's like a footprint on cyberspace. Corporate espionage. You know, corporate houses indulge in espionage. It is possible to scan every email which is sent over the net, and some government agencies actually scan them. Are you disclosing so sensitive or proprietary information? Social media tools provide an instantaneous means of communication with your entire online community. Using these tools in haste can lead to unintended and perhaps even disastrous results. It is possible to scan all email confidential data and hack confidential data. Incidentally, I've just put a small check. This we all do. Check in. How many of you check in when you reach some place? A hotel or something?
बेटा आज घर पे अकेली हो क्या?
श्वेता मैम, आज घर में अकेली हो ना?
दीदी आज अकेले हैं क्या?
अरे मैडम आज
discussing the Masha.
हर एक फ्रेंड ज़रूरी नहीं होता है। सावधानी से अपनी जानकारी सोशल मीडिया पर अपलोड कीजिए, साइबर क्राइम को रोकिए।
Folks traveling home alone tonight, party time. Innocuous posts she put on her Facebook site. All her friends got to know, and she didn't know who all she'd accepted. Maid, delivery boy, chowkidar, everybody was a Facebook friend. An innocuous post, and look what disastrous result it could have had. Do you know who's watching you? When you use Facebook, Google, who watches you? There is this website I came across, flightradar24.com. This website gives you this information. It tracks every aircraft in the sky, real time. Not only civil aircrafts, military aircrafts, defense, UFOs, everything it will track. Which aircraft is traveling, the starting point, ending point, you click on it and you can zero down on the entire track path. And probably it might even have the manifest. How many of you are aware of a thing like this? We all use it. I doubt if anybody doesn't use this. We all need to check how much time it's going to take me to reach from one place to the other. Does this work? How is it being monitored? Any idea? How do they monitor this? Is there a satellite in the sky which immediately zeroes on and finds out? It doesn't. monitor it from a satellite. What it does is they monitor as to how many phones connected to Google are traveling from one place to the other. And virtually every phone is connected to Google. The quantity of phones, the number, the speed at which they are traveling, the place where they're getting jammed, within seconds it will have this information and flash it to you. That's how it monitors it. You see, this was everyone, do you know what this is? Actually a motherboard of a computer. Every computer has a motherboard. Every digital system, for example, a camera will have a motherboard. Every system has a motherboard. This is a motherboard. Everyone from Amazon to Apple to the US military used this piece of equipment from a company in California. This was manufactured in California and installed in every computer which was being used by Amazon, US military. Then they found this. China had hacked it with this one tiny chip. This chip was actually the size of a sharpened pencil. They had installed it in the motherboard. The purpose of it was to bypass every security feature of hardware and software. So they could get and catch every information which was there. So that's how it was being hacked. Even this Apple is from, well, Apple, so I don't know. Maybe it has a similar chip installed. You never know. So it's possible to hack anything and everything. Now, who owns or controls your content? How many of you have actually read the terms and conditions of Facebook, WhatsApp? The moment you open an account, it gives you terms and conditions. You want to read, download, yes or no, accept, yes or no, and we all say yes, because we want that feature. Do you know anything you post on Facebook and WhatsApp, you're actually assigning the rights to them to use it commercially. If you post your picture, they can commercially exploit it and not give you anything. And information that we all go onto that site and say delete. Information never gets deleted. Anything you put on the site can never get deleted. Nothing is ever deleted. Digital evidence, and likewise, if something doesn't get deleted, then it remains there in the form of digital evidence. It tends to be more voluminous, difficult to destroy, easily modified, easily duplicated. Nothing put on the internet ever gets deleted physically, and it is very difficult to erase a digital file.
In life, you purchase your electronics, your groceries, your clothing, whatever else you need. You take off the packaging, you throw it in the trash can, and once a week someone comes to take it all away. It's like magic. Once it's gone, you never have to worry about it again. Unfortunately for us, the same cannot be said for deleting files on a computer storage drive. For one thing, usually deleting a file just moves it to the recycle bin, which has no sanitation technician who comes and removes it every week. It's simply a different folder location where files are stored indefinitely. The file is still there, and anyone with access to your computer can find them. Silly Linus, once it's in the bin, I can just empty the whole thing with one click, and my computer tells me, hey, this is a permanent change, and that file will no longer be accessible on your computer once you do that. And you would be correct mostly. The file is no longer easily accessible on your computer, but there is a huge difference between whether a file is easily accessible and whether it has actually been removed. On both magnetic and solid-state drives, the bits of data that make up your photos, music, tax records, and whatever else are naturally kind of scattered around. And the way your operating system knows where to find all the pieces is, on NTFS formatted drives anyway, through the reference to it in the master file table. So back to deleting stuff. Removing a file from the recycle bin only removes the master file table reference that points to the pieces that make up that file puzzle and registers the space that it used to take up as empty. This gives the operating system permission to go right over it, but that does not mean that right after you clean out your recycle bin, the file is gone. Not by a long shot. In fact, there are many programs that are dedicated to reconstructing deleted files, some of which can do so even after a drive has been reformatted. And using those programs right away, like right after an accidental deletion or reformat before lots of the data has been gradually overwritten, has saved many a person's bacon from costly or upsetting loss of data. But sometimes you want to get rid of files permanently from a storage drive, like if you were going to sell it or donate it. In that case, how do you do it? Well, there are a few tried and true methods that we'll highlight today. The first one is to delete all the data on the drive, then fill it up to capacity with new random data over and over again. This method really wipes your whole drive, so make sure you have any important family pictures transferred to a new drive before you go ahead and do that. The second is physical destruction of the drive. Both fun and effective, but obviously you won't be able to donate that drive. That's more for if there's very sensitive data on it that you just need to get rid of. Speaking of things that are...
So the only way to delete data is write it over several times. Now let's look at how digital forensics is going to use. The next video, which I'm going to show, shows how forensic science has been used to track crimes.
Only on 7 News, for the first time a news camera allowed inside the Boulder County Forensic Lab for Computers, where we found the cat and mouse game of catching criminals is changing. 7 News reporter Amanda Cost revealing the new technology cracking cases and sealing convictions.
So this is off of a phone as it happens.
It's a case of he said, she said.
At this point, no one knew what was going on. Even the neighbors don't know what's going on. And in fact, when police arrived, they find her with blood on her face, and they thought initially she was the actual victim in this case.
Emily Cole was arrested, later convicted, but on trial claimed she was the victim.
But this, recorded off of the victim's cell phone 45 minutes before the event, really demonstrates what she had intended to do.
It's digital evidence.
That's made all the difference in a lot of these cases that we prosecute.
Another example.
Circling the house.
Where GPS coordinates confirmed the stalker's route, and pictures of the child victim found on Luis Gutierrez's computer sealed his conviction.
All of that would have gone undetected because no one was there to see it.
Mom's ex-boyfriend was stalking the daughter, and a lot of the evidence found on his computer really helped in the prosecution of the case.
Discovered here at the Boulder Computer Forensics Lab.
Pretty much every case that happens anymore involves some level of digital evidence.
Computers, hard drives, flash drives, DVDs, cell phones, and memory cards.
We just take it out,
document it,
photograph that,
preserved.
So we're going to use a device called a write blocker to make a copy of...
Now, they were talking of in the last video, of something recovered from person's computer. What they had actually recovered was a photograph of somebody abusing a child. The identity of both of them were not visible, their faces were not visible. So look how forensic science was used to track the victim and the accused.
A girl kneeling on a bathroom counter. To the unassisted eye, there's no way of identifying the person taking this photo, the perpetrator exploiting this young child.
We've got the pill bottle here. As I bring it up, you'll notice the more pixelated it gets.
Apart from the pharmacy and a first name Stephen, it's unreadable. This technology can change that.
So now we can see what the medication is and the first two characters of the prescription number.
That led detectives to this man, Stephen Keating, and they found another clue.
We had a close-up image of the suspect's hand.
By applying filters, they can bring out the detail.
It was actually the very first time that we were able to pull fingerprints from an image.
So this is really strong evidence to put this offender behind bars.
Absolutely.
And he is now serving time.
He's now serving a 110-year prison sentence.
So you see, they could detect or extract fingerprints from a photograph. First time they used that technology by actually using cyber knowledge to get fingerprints from a photograph. Other day there was a matter where they said that fingerprints from a bullet or a shell of a bullet, if it's wiped, is not possible to be extracted. A scientist in England developed a technology with 500 pounds.
From an unassuming office in Northampton has come one of the most significant breakthroughs in forensic science for years. Dr. John Bond from Northamptonshire Police has developed a technique to uncover hidden fingerprints from bullets, even if they were wiped clean. It's quintessentially British. This cardboard box contains the prototype developed for just £500 over 3 years, but it could help resolve thousands of murders around the world.
In the US, police forces have told us they have literally thousands of unsolved murders where a firearm's been discharged, shell casings like this one have been found at the crime scene, and conventionally they can't find fingerprints on the shell casing. So could we help? And we're very pleased to try and do so for them.
Dr. Bond realised that when someone handles a bullet, the sweat on their fingers will slightly corrode the metal. So even if a print is wiped off the casing, the corrosion remains. He's worked out how to recover that lost print. It's been named as one of the top inventions of the year and even mentioned on the hit show CSI. Now, Detective Tony...
See, from a cardboard box, he created this invention that you could extract fingerprints. With only £500, he developed that invention. How many of you are aware of a term called metadata? Metadata is actually data about digital data. Every time a file is created, a digital file is created, a metadata is simultaneously created with this. When you log on to your computer, you would see there is a file name, a path, a size, the nature. That also is kind of a metadata. Metadata is very essential in determining the authenticity of a particular digital file. Now I'm bringing this topic up before you lawyers, because when you come into cross-examination or even leading evidence, it will be a very important aspect for you to establish whether the digital evidence which is produced in court is authentic or not. Every digital file would contain metadata about that file, which is in a digital photo as to what camera was used, as to what lens was used, in a file as to the author, number of characters, when created, when edited. Now look at this picture. If I were to tell you that this is a picture I took yesterday, I doubt how many of you can identify this. Well, this is actually a picture of Shimla. This was taken from the judge's lounge in Shimla from the High Court of Shimla. Now if I tell you I took it yesterday from a digital SLR, now and file a 65B affidavit in court, how many of you can catch me on it? None of you can. What if I produce the metadata? Look, this is one, there are several softwares by which you can extract metadata. Metadata here has captured that this was taken from an Apple iPhone 7 on 22nd of July 2017 at 17:13:49. It also captures which lens was used. This was back dual camera. Now, I tried an experiment. I copied it from one device to another to verify whether the metadata would change. Well, incidentally, it did not change. It still stores Apple iPhone 7, date taken, the lens used. This was another photograph I took, again with a different kind of camera. Now this metadata captured it is Samsung GT 19500 and date is 16 June 2016 and the time is 1902. Again another digital photograph was taken. Now this time it was taken with a Canon EOS 600 date. Then it captures the make of the camera and the firmware, the software which was installed in the camera. And incidentally, it also captured the description of the lens and the serial number of the lens. Now this is the kind of information which is available with the digital document. Now if I were to only produce that photograph with a 65B certificate, there is no way you can disprove it. But if this metadata is available, then you can easily verify the authenticity or otherwise. Now thereafter I copied the first photograph and edited it. All I did was convert it into black and white to see whether the metadata would change. The metadata captured showed me that it was Apple iPhone 7, but Windows Photo Editor was used. And when it was used, it captured that date. But it also retained the original date when the photograph was taken. Likewise, the lens of the camera. In a PPT, PowerPoint presentation, you'll have the author, the date when it was created, when it was last saved, how many slides are there, how many words are there. Similarly, in a Word document, when it was created, when it was last saved and it was last printed. All this information is captured digitally by the file. Now again another photograph I took. Now this incidentally showed me a GPS location. You know the location services on your phone? If you have it switched on, this photograph incidentally showed me a GPS location as to where this photograph was taken. When I zoomed in, it showed me that this is where I was standing. This was actually in Srinagar at Lalit. This is the exact spot where I was standing when this photograph was taken. So that's the kind of information metadata captures of every digital file. Now we're all concerned with Aadhaar. So last video that I'm going to show is what is actually happening world over.
识别的技术在14年我们突破了人眼的识别准确率。那达到这么一个超过人的一个能力之后，它就有一个非常潜在的一个很大的一个市场可以去做应用。比如说，我们可以让机器去自动的判别。
阶段的话，我们会通过布在重点地方地区的这些摄像头，如果出现我们的公安的重点布控人员有出现，而且它的频率很高。
对这个技术之后呢，我们觉得是大大提高了我们的工作的效率，大大提高了。
我认为呢，就是说人们在生活当中呢，既有安全的问题，也有隐私的问题。
See, everyone is scanned, and we are talking of Aadhaar. People who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who actually can and do. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Sachdeva, for a very informative and insightful lecture. Thank you very much for your painstaking effort in the PowerPoint presentation that your Lordship has made today. I'm sure the lawyer community will stand to benefit throughout their careers. And now, without much ado, I would like to call upon our next speaker, Mr. A.K. Mata, a senior advocate and a pioneer on the subject of cybercrime. Please enlighten us on the subject.
Just a small course correction first. Pioneer on the subject of cybercrime. Anyway, thank you. I don't believe that's correct though. Honorable Justice Sachdeva has taken us through a lot of information on the various manifestations of what cyberspace, if I will put it generically, enlightening, at least to me, in many facets of which were very interesting to know. The connect between cyber and crime perhaps is the core, one of the core issues for this evening's discussion. The terms cyber and the term electronic are a little loosely expressed. We have cyberspace, cybercrime, expressions which are variants of cyber. But what exactly is cyber? Justice Sachdeva took us to that, so I don't need to revisit that. I just now endeavor to put an expression of thought that I have. Electronic medium or internet is not really a product. It's a device to achieve a product. It's a device to obtain something. It's a medium. It's not a product by itself. There can be two views, I accept that, but that's the view that I hold. Now when we are connecting cyber to crime, it is deployment of cyber techniques, cyber technologies, cyber manifestations, the use of cyber technology to commit a crime. We have the IT Act 2000. We also have penal statutes, the IPC. We have different other penal statutes. The endeavor to bring about a connect between cyber and crime was to exalt the commission of an offense, to exalt the punishment by the use of a deployment of a technology which was hitherto before not known. Yes, there were emails before, yes, there were internet before, but the way the explosion took place, we all had something like 286, 386, 486. I remember early computers. Justice Sachdeva talked to us about floppies. I remember we had 8¼ inch floppies. They were called floppies because they were really floppy. That's why they were called floppies. So the kind of deployment of that technology which then came in with, yes, the smartphones and the computers and so on and so forth, that's the purpose by which the cyber crime got to be attended. Let me just invite you to a few provisions of the IPC. There are provisions which require maintenance of public tranquility. There are provisions which require not to disseminate information which can cause communal disharmony, which can cause any kind of disruption in social order. There are provisions which require you to follow a sequence of life, an orderly sequence of life. Each of them have got penal ramifications. Now if we use cyber technology, for instance, fake news for one. It's very easy to plant a fake news. All of us are victims of fake news. Sometimes we unwittingly believe it. Sometimes we perhaps want to believe it. But fake news, when spread over a medium such as a cyberspace, fake news will spread nothing like more than wildfire. And soon enough, you can create a situation which ordinarily in the physical world, if I can use the expression physical world, would not have been so quick. Today, if you have a Facebook group, you have a WhatsApp group or whatever else, one news and it spreads all over the world, whoever receives it. It wasn't possible. The endeavor to connect these two in the realm of cybercrime is to exalt the offense. The offense is nonetheless yet the same. But the endeavor is by deployment of a technology, by deployment of a technique, which you have exalted the effect so largely, you must correspondingly be faced with consequences, which is one of the purposes of the cybercrime mechanisms, as it were. I know we have issues of jurisdiction, we have issues of competence. For instance, I remember a case, goes back many years ago. I was myself involved in that case. A hotel, no names here, a guest booked for this hotel in America, and he came to India, stayed as a guest. Unfortunately, he tripped in the lift and he broke his leg. The hotel extended to him and all the hospitality. He was in the hotel for about a month and a little bit more, had his treatments done. When he was well with pool malas and everything, they sent him back. But as soon as he landed, he filed a suit in the United States against the hotel. We questioned, I was the counsel for the hotel, and question said, the act took place in India. There is no jurisdiction for United States court to take this case as a case of tort. The court held against us and said, he booked the hotel from a site in the United States. The hotel was accessible by the site in the United States. The court has jurisdiction. We won finally on different grounds, unimportant. So the question was territorial jurisdictions. Different courts have different rules on territorial jurisdiction, different rules on cognizability. For instance, suppose a post is filed regarding a person's identity from a server which is not located in India. But the post is available here for everybody to see. What, if at all, A is an offense? What is the nature of offense? What kind of offense can be taken cognizance of? whether court in India will take cognizance of that offense, and so on and so forth. All of us remember IC 814, not many years ago, a very unpleasant and sad memory. We had an Indian bird which was hijacked over Indian territory. The act of hijacking is an offense under Indian law, we all know. But the perpetrators were never available in India. They went into territories not very friendly with us. Now, can an Indian court take jurisdiction and prosecute those people, even declare them as proclaimed offenders, and close proceedings by prosecuting them, and even in absentia sentencing them? In the same way, if a crime takes place, for instance, a crime of a nature which otherwise does not take place in India, the server is not in India, we all know what is cloud technology, I'm coming to that in a moment. Does an Indian court have jurisdiction? According to me, if the offense takes place here, the court certainly has jurisdiction. The fact that you do not have recourse to the victim, to the accused, that you cannot get the accused to face proceedings here, does not take away jurisdiction. But we must nonetheless remember that the offense must be one which is available to be connected both under the IT Act and other relevant provisions. Let me just very quickly invite some of you who have read this as well. Section 66 of the Technology Act, of the IT Act. 66A, of course, has been undone. Punishment for dishonestly receiving stolen computer, resource or communication device. Let's take a simple illustration. You have a house, you have a lock and key. Somebody goes and duplicates that key and steals your valuables. It constitutes an offense under the IPC. Now, you have a digital house and you have a digital lock and you have digital assets, and somebody duplicates that digital key, unlocks that lock and takes your digital assets. That's an offense again. So what does the IT Act do? It connects the medium of information technology to the offences which are otherwise classically known as offences under the regime of the IPC or other laws. So the situation, whether it is under 66C, D, E, etc. and so on and so forth, it all connects those offences but which are used with the mechanism of not the physical world. I'll just take you from Justice Sachdeva when he said about the cyberspace, and it is a nobody's space. With great respect to your lordships, cyberspace, though large, though literally not bridled and controlled, is not unlimited. Cyberspace is ultimately space on servers. It is not what we will call the open air or the open sky. It's not that. It is space on servers. Servers are ultimately owned and controlled. Access to servers are available to your handphones, to your laptops, to your other devices through service providers. Your phone is not equipped, your computer is not equipped to reach a server unless you have a service provider. Your service provider is the nexus between the server and yourself. The service providers are all licensed under regimes. The regulatory mechanism by which the service providers are licensed, in my respectful submission, there can be controls to ensure that there can be a restriction or at least a prohibition of loading certain kind of programs on those servers which are inaccessible. Some of you have traveled to Dubai, I'm sure. Has anybody accessed WhatsApp in Dubai? No. Because as per their policy, right or wrong is not the issue. As per their policy, they ensured the service providers would not be able to provide the service of WhatsApp to subscribers in Dubai. In the same way in China, I'm sure some of you have traveled, WhatsApp is not available. And perhaps and so on and so forth in many other countries. So the licensing authority has within its domain and capability to put restrictions for the purpose of security of the subscribers. A very valuable point Justice Sachdeva made about when we take an account, let's say in Facebook, we either have to say yes or to say no. That's it. If you say no, you don't get the account, and if you say yes, you go with the whole thing. The question is, when they put conditions which are otherwise anti-competitive, which are otherwise in breach of privacy, there must be a mechanism in the licensing regime to disable those companies from putting those conditions without which you cannot have access to that app. Now, if this is considered, those companies can no longer insist upon you to sign on the dotted line. They can't say accept these 23 conditions or you don't get the access to the app. It cannot be done, or the app will not work faithfully. Some of you who are students of science might probably remember an expression called the charcoal block. I don't know if some of you remember. It goes back to school, I remember though. Now a charcoal block is a concept whereby, let's say, the medium of sound, the medium of light, the medium of radiation, they were the small holes made in the charcoal block from which one could see through. But there are innumerable other mediums of which we may not even know. So internet is just one more of those media. It's not something the end of it. We have what we today know, and at least as far as I know, artificial intelligence has taken internet to a far greater plane. Justice Sachdeva spoke about it in good detail. When we access Google, Google does this and the other. Artificial intelligence is there and well beyond. For those who are familiar with the concept of metaphysics, in fact, the sync between artificial intelligence is to reach a realm where it can actually penetrate into your mind. The moment you look into a device, it knows what you're looking at, it knows what you're wanting in your mind, it knows what you're looking for. That's the capture of artificial intelligence. As Ms. Lordship said, when a lady or a gent would look to the same side, there could be different results. When an elderly person or a younger person, and so on and so forth. Now, we have this issue of confidentiality. Every one of us knows that when we are accessing the internet, we are exposing ourselves to confidentiality. What are the options? Either you live in the modern world or you submit yourself to confidentiality exposures. Does the law adequately take care of it? The regimes, we are all fully aware. The answers to securing confidentiality is not what I am here to speak about, but the answers are that you can secure your information by least disclosures. You need not make disclosures which are unnecessary. Should you need to make disclosures, you should make disclosures only to secured parties and not to people here and there. Justice Sachdeva talked about people going onto the Facebook and posting pictures and so on and so forth, like the lady in the video saying, I'm alone, whatever. Amongst the other things was a very frequent change of passwords. It's necessary because passwords are available. Internet is like an open book, no matter how hard you feel otherwise. No sooner you're on the internet, you've actually exposed your whole life to it. There was a question we debated, it never came up. We have today electronic filing in our courts. As a petitioner, I could say electronic filing reveals a lot more than what the petition reveals. I don't want to go electronic. I have a right to privacy which I may not oblige to disclose. I will only go physical. That's a debate which is not for today. But illustratively, confidentiality is another subject. Some of us have heard of RFIDs. They are physical devices which are used to protect the capture of information from devices physically held by you. The modern technology, which is the artificial intelligence, is taking the physical RFID concept into the electronic era. So today what we are looking at is you're going to have RFIDs, which are not physical RFIDs, but they are RFIDs which will be electronic in character, which will kind of build an electronic firewall around for securities. Location tracking was another aspect that Justice Sachdeva spoke about. I wouldn't go to that. Lastly, it is cloud. Now, as I said earlier on, the purpose of the criminal jurisprudence on cyber is to be able to bring home criminals who would otherwise be untraceable. You could be sitting here and somebody could be monitoring your activities. You could be sitting here and somebody could be accessing your account, maybe not to withdraw, maybe just to see the kind of spend that you have. Each of your bankers, each of your service providers, each of your accounts require information to be disclosed to them, which they often farm out. They give it to people who then map the profile of the consumers. Is this an offense? That's something which needs to be examined. Can they share your private information with others with whom you do not want to share? For instance, the way you spend, we have apps which monitor the way you spend. These apps know the kind of expenditures you do, the places you visit, the kind of your profile, your income, so on and so forth. So all these things at the end I would only like to sum up and say, it is more important to be safe and secure by being minimalistic. Yes, we can't live without it, but at the same time we don't need to go the whole hog. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for giving us very valuable inputs on the subject and for taking us into the nitty-gritties of the subject. And I'm sure that the legal community will benefit from all the inputs given by our speakers. Now may I call upon Ms. Geeta Luthra, Senior Advocate, and Anu Nirula to kindly come forward for the felicitation of the speakers and the guests.
Good evening, everyone. One way to show our token of respect in regards to our guest here, Honorable Chief Justice Sir is not here. May I call upon Mr. Kalimur Rahman to gift a book to Honorable Justice Mr. Sanjeev Sachdeva. Please, Ms. Anju Ahluwalia, please come and give the book to Mr. Ashwani Kumar Mata, our Senior Advocate. Mr. Gurmeher Sistani, please come and give a book to Ms. Geeta Luthra, Senior Advocate. Doesn't matter. I'll allow me to do the honors. Gauri Govardhan, please come and give the book to Mr. Rupal. Mr. Rupal, I guess, is left. Oh, he's here. Mr. Pranav, please come and give the book to Mr. Vijay Sondhi, our very learned dear friend. Sankalp Jain, please come and give the book to Mr. Aman Sareen. Thank you so much, but you have to stay back for the tea.
And for a thank you.
Of course, for a thank you vote also.
Request Mr. President to come and say a few words before we head for the food. I am hungry too. So keep it.
Let me thank first Sondi sir because I changed my position. Justice Sachdeva, Mr. Ashwani Mata, Madam Geeta Luthra, Aman, my younger brother, and Vijay Sondhi, my elder brother. It's the best thing to say thank you. And let's go for tea now. My first is I have to apologize because, I was not here in the first session because I had to rush immediately. One of my friend's mother expired. So, I start with an apology. And then when I came, I heard Justice Sachdeva and I heard Mr. Ashwani Mata. I can only say that slowly and steadily, we all are becoming wiser day by day by understanding a little bit of cyber law. Justice Sachdeva is in a wrong profession. He should have been a computer expert. Whatever changes you see today in the High Court is thanks to Justice Muralidhar, Justice Shakdar and Justice Sanjeev Sachdeva and some more judges. The other day we were a party to this telepresence, what is it, sir? And that's a wonderful thing which the Delhi High Court is going to start now, where from any part of the world, suppose somebody is not in a position to come to the court, can argue his case or her case from there. The evidence can be done without a physical presence. And it is going to have a very, I would say, a positive results, because in a country like India, you actually need these kind of technologies. And from 2011, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, we had this cyber crime increasing day by day. It has increased by 300%. It could have increased more. So such kind of a workshop is always, I would say, a great welcome. And I congratulate this young team. I see, where's Mr. That's Gumman, Annu and all, and his entire core team, Vijay Sondi, Nandita Rao, and there are other people also who've been really working hard. And it's really, really encouraging to see that these people who have no political background are contributing towards the, I would say, the real progress of the bar. So, thank you, Justice Sachdeva, for giving us this knowledge about cybercrime. Thank you, Mr. Gumman and Annu and Nandita Rao. I don't see her now, but in any case, and the entire core committee of the lecture group. Thank you, all the people who have come in a very formal dress and telling me that I have come in a very casual way. Thank you, all the audience who are here and by taking out your time and encouraging these young people. And I hope, because I think this would be our last function as an office bearer, that the future generation in the office would continue this. Because I see a lot of WhatsApp group. I hope that what they say in WhatsApp group will continue. Thank you, Mr. Amit Sharma, the Secretary of the Bar, who has always been a great support to me, and the other members, Madam Aruna Tikku, then I see Amit Saxena, I saw Manisha Tyagi, and all these people have been always helping such kind of cause. And I, in fact, when I came here to start the welcome speech, I came across a biggest, I would say, an encouraging, and which I want to tell all the people who are sitting here, and they have to see where they fit into it. I read somewhere 5 regrets of dying, the Guardian reported. And those 5 are, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. So when you come to these kind of functions, you can realize that a judge, Mr. Sondi, Mr. Mata, Geeta Luthra, Madam Geeta Luthra, Aman, all of them, they actually come here because they believe that yes, this is what we have to do. What people will say, they don't care. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I don't think this will apply to Justice Sachdeva or Geeta Madam or Vijay Sondi, but it applies to me. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I had let myself be happier. You know, every such function, you have to see where do you fit into it. And I'm once again saying, thank you to the core committee. Thank you to all the people who are sitting here for encouraging such kind of shows. And I would request another thing, you please start circulating amongst the other members also to bring more and more people here where they can sit and understand in a much informal way rather than in a formal circumstances where we just, take it in and then throw it out. So last but not least, yes, Vijay, you are absolutely right. The refreshments are waiting for you. I would request all of you to come and join us for a lovely refreshment which this organizing committee has organized. Thank you.